Welcome back to Let's Talk Money with me, Alma Maria Renas. In this next episode, you will hear a conversation between myself and Ramona Ortega. Ramona Ortega is the CEO and founder of My Money, My Future, a mission-driven fintech company that combines tailored content and simple-to-use tools to help millennials, particularly women and people of color, manage their money with confidence. Before starting My Money, My Future, Ramona was a corporate securities attorney in New York, where she worked in the financial sector. And we didn't even get the chance to talk about any of this within the context of the queer community, which after watching the video again and editing it, I realized that would have been really important, at least for me, and I know a lot of the people that subscribe to my channel, to hear as well. So maybe we'll get the chance to talk to Ramona again. In the meantime, I will leave all the information that you need to learn more about Ramona down in the comment section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. And hit that notification bell so that you know when I drop new content around finance and emotions. Ramona shares some information about her upcoming book, and I will let her explain more about it.
Hi, Ramona. It's so great to see you.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's a great topic to talk about love and money. It's so important coming out of, Valentine's and into spring. And, it's a good time to be reassessing our relationships with money today.
Yeah, and this is one of my favorite, two of my favorite things to talk about is emotional intelligence and money. And that's the motivation behind this podcast, Let's Talk Money, to see where those two meet, like where those two things intersect. And you mentioned love. And I know there's a lot of negative connotations in our society around people loving money. So I don't know if you want to kick that off. Maybe you want to
That's a
help
great
us
way.
pass that. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Well, I think it's not unlike our relationship with real love, right? I mean, so I think that there's lots of ways to approach love and money. One obviously is just sort of, do you love money? And there's this negative connotation. And I think depending on what spectrum of essentially the political scale you sit on, I think that's sort of, where some of the conflict comes in. And especially for women of color, we're not taught to love money because somehow that equates a certain number of things that have negative connotations. Things like you're selfish, you don't care about other people, money at all costs, right? So, and I think that that's been sort of the sense around when people talk about getting rich, right? Is that somehow that will equate you doing things that are, without scruples, that you will trade in, your friends or make decisions based on money and not people. And I don't think that it's a black and white line. I think that especially for women of color, that we have to be in a relationship with money that is conducive to supporting our communities. And that doesn't mean necessarily being poor, right? I mean, I think, having worked in the nonprofit sector for many years before, and I think as a young activist, there was this side of ideas like, oh, all capitalists are bad. If you want to be rich, you're not going to do the good work. And those things are just, it's just not true. And in fact, given the context of the U.S. or even global context at this point, in terms of how capitalism and the capital markets work, until we have a different system, we have to understand how to use this system to our benefit. And that doesn't mean putting money before people, but it does mean how do we use money, how do we use wealth creation as a way to support our families and communities.
You touched upon some like really important things, and I'm just gonna list them off. One, a little bit of your backstory, which I'm really interested in learning about, how you were an activist and your work in nonprofit. Because for those those who didn't catch it on the intro, Ramona is you're a lawyer, right? You have a background, you have a law degree. So I'm very interested in hearing a little bit of your backstory, where that comes in with your activism, but also you touched upon like this, I guess for lack of a better word, demonizing of capitalism.
I still consider myself very much an activist or an advocate. I think that now I'm, having spent, 20 plus years in various industries, I don't have to raise that flag all the time. I know who I am. I know the work that I do. And in fact, the company that I created was one of the first in the tech ecosystem and fintech to really say, our goal, our mission is to close the racial wealth gap. If that isn't an activist point of view, I don't know what is, right? So I grew up in Northern California. I'm, third generation Mexican American. My parents both have, at some point in their lives, worked in the field. So I'm the first generation to go to college, the first to get a law degree, the first to move out of California, actually. So I'm what we call, actually, we've been talking a lot about this. I'm a first mover. And, I grew up in a very, poor to working class, not only family, but community and extended family. And that really informed, I think, all of the things that I've done in my career and how I've approached the work that I do. So very early on, I realized that having or living in an environment where money equated opportunity. And what I seen was that when people didn't have money or didn't have financial security, they didn't have opportunity. And while there are exceptions, and I do think that I was an exception to that rule for a lot of different reasons, that was a really important piece of my story. And so going forward, even when I went to UCLA, I mean, I was very involved in activism on campus. That was like 2009. It was, when there was a lot of the anti-affirmative action campaigns going on in California. And so I was very involved in those things in terms of a policy perspective. And in fact, when I decided to go to New York, what couple of things had happened. I've always been a journalist. That was my first love. I ended up working at 60 Minutes. I went to New York to do that. And I loved really covering news and understanding how we can translate policy and newsworthy stories into sort of layman's terms. And then eventually I ended up making my way over into a very big think tank called the MDRC, where I really looked at national pilot projects around welfare reform, education reform. And so I became a social scientist in that space and really understanding how important it was that we create policies that help support communities of color and how to support people moving from poverty into the middle class and really giving people a safety net. So I think I've approached all of this work from a place of activism. I think back on my own story and the fact that my mom and her family are 3 generations in California, and I was the first to go to college, tells me that poverty is not just about immigration status. It's not just about, if you come over here and you work hard, things are all going to fall into place. They don't. And in fact, we need to make sure that there's policies and practices and protections for people so that they have opportunity. And all of that, by the way, a lot has to do with, money and your financial security. So again, early on, that's shaped all of the things that I do, and financial security and opportunity have been sort of my life's calling. And so I've been able to do that in different segments of my career. And then when I was working in human rights, I worked in human rights for about 10 years, had a great career working at the intersection of international human rights law and how to solve for disparate impact. And that's things like, why is there so many people of color adversely affected by health outcomes, the criminal justice system, education, housing, all of those things? And then when I was doing human rights work, I realized also that we needed to be on the other side of the table. So we as activists, conscious folks, needed to understand the sort of the flow of money. How could we afford, how can we fund innovative solutions to some of the problems that we're identifying? And that's when I decided to go to law school and focus in corporate law. And that's what I did. And I had a great run in corporate law and was able to really sort of get a taste of all kinds of things. Bankruptcy. I worked in the Southern District, which is one of the highest courts of bankruptcy in the country. I worked at the SEC in asset management, which is hedge funds and private equity compliance and regulation. I did securities litigation at a private firm where I worked on big cases like Madoff and John Corzine. So I was able to really get the inside scoop on not only capital markets, but financial regulation and financial markets. And then I took that knowledge and I said, okay, who, if not me, whom to create a company that uses technology, that understands finances, that understands the problems on the ground, and bring that together to try to bring together a solution. And that's really the genesis of My Money, My Future.
One of the topics that one of the strands I can pull out of what you just said is the issue of racism and institutionalized racism. And let's take, for example, the people who want to have their houses, what are they called, evaluated so they can sell them?
Oh, yeah, sure.
The appraisals, the housing appraisals.
Yeah.
Housing appraisals, and how it's been documented that the same house, if the owner is white, gets appraised at a higher value than if the owner is black. So racism has dollar signs attached to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a direct correlation between structural racism and poverty. And, it's almost a no-brainer in my mind. The two go hand in hand. And it's the poverty and the wealth gap, or the racial wealth gap, are direct results of structural discrimination from the beginning of time, beginning of this country at least, right? I mean, if not actually even before, but people were able to get rich off cheap labor, and that continues to happen, by the way. The fact that we don't even have a $15 minimum wage.
Right, right, and it's not exclusive to the United States. This is a situation, a global situation. You also cut one of the other strands that I'd like to pull on is the topic of immigration. Particularly the international relationship between Mexico and the United States. So much of what is considered illegal immigration from Mexico and Mexicans is motivated by finance. It's motivated by economic opportunity. And
or perceived economic opportunity, but yes.
Right. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. And that's not a new thing, right? I mean, this has been happening even before this country. I mean, it started in Latin America, right? You got coffee, sugar, tobacco. Those were commodities. Yeah. It started with commodities trading, and gold, of course.
And then going back more, slavery, right? We had people who were a big commodity a couple of hundred years ago, and that included the native people of the Americas. But I guess I kind of want to see how this, if we can bring it down to the emotional level, because money for so many people is an emotional trigger. So what I'm hearing from a little bit of your story from your past is that your own relationship with money changed over the years as you began to be perhaps more aware of the relationship between your existence as a person of color in this world and finance. And I'm wondering, how has that evolved in your emotional life? How is the growth from being one of the first people in your family to go to college, one of the first people to move out of Northern California? How is that related to your emotional growth? Or have you seen a relationship between your emotional growth and your relationship to money?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Look, I think when we talk about our emotional relationship to money, most of it is triggered by shame. When I'm talking, okay, in the context of communities of color, right? There's a lot of shame around being poor, and yet we know for a fact, and even more so now, that those are complicated. A lot of that situation is really a result of this very complex structural discrimination, right? So yet we take it as personal responsibility, right? There's there's a lot of misunderstanding around money, and how it supports our growth, because we don't talk about money in our families, right? If you don't learn about it at home, you don't learn about it at school, you don't learn about it, and you just end up making financial mistakes, and that's how you learn. Um, there's money in relationships with family, right? And obligations. And we could talk a little bit about that because I think that's really important. And then there's our relationship, our personal relationship to money, and in particular as women of color, right? I think there's a lot that we do, not only as women, but as women of color too, we use money as a way to feel better, right? Like the world is hard to us in so many ways. And I think that relation in and of itself is complicated, which is, what do I do? How do I spend money? How am I responsible or not responsible with money so that I can make myself feel better, right? And so that's, I mean, and that's everyone, but I think it has a very particular impact for women of color. My relationship to money has changed. It's interesting because I've always had a fascination with money. And I think it's because very early on, my grandmother used to clean house, or she was really the house. She lived on site she was a caretaker for a very big house. And this house was owned by an ex-49er. So, I mean, it's just an amazing mansion, beautiful home in the Napa Valley Hills. And so we would go and help clean the house. Me and my mom, we would help my grandmother. And I think that was some of my early sort of days where I got a look at what money really was. Because I think for most people, if you live in a low-income neighborhood, that's kind of all you see. That's all you're exposed to. I happened to be exposed to this pretty massive amount of wealth through my grandmother because she was the caretaker. And I remember thinking, I mean, I must have been 11 to 12 years old and going like, wow, what do you do to have this? Like, how do I get this? Right? Or like laying in the beds before you make them up to just be like, wow, can you imagine living here? And that kind of exposure, though, is really important because those are really formative years. And I think having that was very clear to me that, okay, there are people who work really hard and still don't get this. And then there's people who seem to get this and don't work at all. So there's something wrong with the system here. And so I think that actually was really important in my journey in my relationship, that I was always very aware that it wasn't just like, oh, if you work hard, you're going to get this. And so I didn't buy into to that sort of, narrative, which I think was very helpful because oftentimes, especially as folks of color, you might be the first one to do something. You're like, oh, I'm special. I made it. And it's like, no, the system's just not built for us to all equally share in that, right? And so I think, if anything, that my relationship has grown stronger with money and figuring out how to use it in ways that make more sense. I think some of the shame has been left. I didn't have a lot of shame. I've made tons of money mistakes. But I think now I'm at a point where I'm like, yeah, I've made those mistakes. No one was there to tell me what to do. No one was there to show me how to use the money that I did make. And this is exactly why my company and my story are important, because we need to know so that we don't make those mistakes, and that we can also understand in the context of, for example, student debt. How many of us are like, damn, I have negative net worth because I have so much student debt, and you feel bad, but then you're like, wait, everyone told me that I should go to school. Education is the way out, especially for Latinos, right? It's like, If you get an education, all will be better. It's like, yeah, that's true. I mean, everybody should have an education, but at the end of the day, it's not the answer, right? It's not the answer to getting us to a different place. So I think being able to have the relationship where you're very honest about what money can do for you and who's deserving or undeserving, that was something that became, I think, clearer. And I think I have a better relationship now because I have a sense of why it's important to do what I'm doing.
So essentially what I'm hearing is that you now have a healthy relationship with money. You know, my therapist calls it, how do you say it in English? But when you you pull something apart, she calls it
Disaggregated.
desarticular. You're like,
Oh, yes, yeah, yes, right. It's almost
unjoining it.
disaggregation.
Yeah.
Yep, yep,
That's what
yep, yep.
that's what I'm hearing. That you kind of like
Yeah, that's a good one.
apart.
That's a really good one. Yeah, I think that it's similar to that. I wouldn't say I have a good relationship with money. I mean, it's not like super healthy. I'm aware of it though. I'm aware of what I'm doing. If I'm overspending, for example, I know I'm overspending and I'm very aware of that. I will in my head though think, okay, this is outside of what I'm usually spending here. I'm going to have to cut back or be more frugal in the next week or two. Right. So I think the awareness of it is important. If I'm making a big purchase, for example, I'm not just doing it without thinking. I'm like, okay, do I really want this? Is this something I'm willing to spend that money on? Is it an asset? You probably heard me say this before. It's like buy, experiences, but buy assets, not things, right? So I'm really trying to practice everything I preach. And I think that's what gets me that healthy relationship. It's like any relationship though. Um, it's never perfect and you're always kind of learning and you're growing, but the awareness and this, like you said, this disaggregation of like, okay, me making one mistake is not, it doesn't mean that I'm terrible with money, right?
Or that you can never have a healthy relationship or a healthier relationship. Like one mistake, it might be like a huge mistake and you've like gone bankrupt, for example, but that doesn't
Right.
mean that you can't improve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And
Yeah.
I think what we learn in all of this is how to have that conversation with ourselves around money, but also I think more importantly, like what is money in our lives? And I think this is a really key thing to this conversation, which is how do you develop a healthy relationship? Well, one is is knowing yourself. What does money do for you? Right? So another thing that I talk about a lot is that money is just a means to an end. What's your end? And that's really important because it's about what makes you happy. What is it that and then you align that with your spending, right? This is who I am as a person. I want to be someone, for example, that's financially free. There are other people that they want financial security at all costs. It's a very different road. You spend money differently if you're on that road. Maybe you want to be someone that's like, I actually, and again, no shame. There are people that I like great things. I want to have the Louis Vuitton bag. I want to have these very expensive, flashy things. That's okay. There is no shame in that. If that is who your personality is, sort of what you're drawn to, then align your dollars and align your financial decisions to that, right? So you better go out and find a job that's going to support that lifestyle, right? Because there's other people that are like, I want to work less, but I also need less.
I think one of the things that I think that also can like play into is the dysfunction. So it's,
Mm,
there are some people who are like, brand whores, right? That they have to have like, no matter what. So if that means going into debt, having 10 different credit cards and maxing them all out, they are going to have the most trendy, the most expensive branding, whatever. And I would see that as a dysfunction. Like
right.
that's not a healthy way to relate to money because you're harming yourself. So I wanted to know, how your work with My Money, My Future could help people with some of their dysfunctions around money and how your work addresses that, if it addresses it at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we want to do more of, absolutely. But I do think that one of the things that we were very clear about in creating the brand, so this is the part of the brand story, is that there was no other fintech company that when we looked around and seen what was out there that was addressing the very particular needs of communities of color. Because when we think about our needs, and as women of color especially, when it comes to money, we're inadvertently addressing these issues of shame. We're inadvertently addressing these issues of take control of your life by taking control of your money, right? We're addressing these sort of the ideas of, you know, can you hit restart? If you've made financial decisions that are harmful or that are hurting you, here's how to restart, right? So not having shame, for example, about having a bad credit score. That this is going to, you know, this happens because we're not taught about this stuff, or perhaps we're using these credit cards as a way to fulfill something else in our life. And so what is important is that we're talking about money in the context of real lives and contextualizing it through the lens of culture. And I think that's where we get to really address some of the underlying issues around the relationship with money. One of the biggest things that we I think do differently than other companies, for example, is how we think about retirement planning in the context of our families, right? So intergenerational wealth and the relationship that you have with money vis-a-vis your family. Because when we think about Latinos, for example, there is kind of an obligation almost. There's an assumption that you're going to take care of your parents, that you're going to, you know, bring them in, you're going to, right? So when we think about retirement planning, you need a very different plan, not only to help your parents, but also to support yourself and how you can do that. And so I think that's really important. And so that we're not, you know, a traditional financial advisor might be like, that's a terrible financial decision to take care of your parents. You shouldn't do that. I mean, I've heard people say that. And it might be in their eyes, but the problem is like, we're not going to reverse, you know, 100 years of culture because it's not a good financial decision. No, what we're going to say at My Money in the Future is say, let's make a plan around that because that's important to you. The money is there to serve you. You don't serve the money. And I think that alone, I think, really changes the narrative. So relationships around and conversations around money to family, money to yourself, money to your partners. This is another big thing for women of color. We often, either we give up power in the household around money to our husbands or partners, etc., or even sometimes to fathers or other like male figures, or we don't know anything about what the finances are in your home. We don't ask those questions. And so oftentimes the other thing that is different from, for example, even white women is that when we marry and we get divorced, we don't walk away with a lot of money in our pockets. Half the times our baby daddies don't even pay child support. So again, different financial relationship. We have to do things differently because of that.
Yeah, and we also, kind of.
You're nodding your head in a lot of agreement.
Oh, yeah, like you just basically described my experience.
Sound familiar?
Yeah, oh, yeah. And something that I would add to that as a parent is now the way that I see it is, okay, I'm not raising any machistas. Like that's not happening. Like my sons are not, they cannot go into the world expecting that, you know, if they're straight and they're in a relationship with a woman, that woman has to do anything, period. Like she's not obligated to do anything. And that's, you know, I had a conversation with a friend the other day who was in her partner is Mexican, and they were having all these issues around money, finance, work. And I like stopped her and I was like, look, you're married to a machista. Everything he is saying and doing is textbook machista. It doesn't matter if he's not even 30 yet. Like, it doesn't matter, because people are still raising their sons and their daughters, their children, to buy into this machista framework. And I see it as a part of my role is, you know, my kids, they cook, they clean, they do their own laundry, they you know, they're expected to get a job and work, and like they have to. And kind of addressing to your point of like this expectation around children supporting parents, I think that's a terrible, terrible practice. And I saw it play out with my mother. My mother's Mexican. I saw her play out with her parents. And, you know, my grandmother had been dead 8 or 9 years. And my mom was still dealing with the realities of supporting her mother because of paperwork. And so she had to have like all these documents redone because legally it was just all of these issues that stemmed directly from this belief that she was responsible for caring for her parents. And my mother is the second of 12 kids. Why should it be any one child's responsibility? If anything, you know, everybody take on that responsibility. So one of the things that I have shared with my kids is that I am not your responsibility. Like, I got to figure things out for me, and I have to save for retirement. And I, you know, if at some point in the future I need your help and it's something you can give to me, that's fantastic. But that's not the expectation. Like, I can't operate as a mother thinking that you are here to serve me. I don't think that's fair. I really don't. And I think it has to do with the trauma that we deal with in a Mexican culture, coming from a Mexican culture. That stuff can be really traumatic. Those types of expectations. And that plays right into emotions, how we relate to each other emotionally, like, es tu obligación, you know, you have to do this. And it's like, would you show me the clay tablet that says that I have to, you know, even you can even be like, it says respect your parents. It doesn't say pay for them in their old age. Mom, dad, save money. Like, get educated.
Right.
So,
I mean, and I think that we're changing that generation is changing, right? We are coming into new expectations, but I still see this. And sometimes it's not just with parents. It's also inside of a family, right? You know, one brother and sister maybe makes it, right? Meaning they graduated from college, they got a good job, they're living at home, but they're the sole supporter while the other siblings are kind of like floating, right? And I think that's something that we see too a lot in our communities of color across. I've seen it where there's this obligation for the sole earner, the one that's doing well, but they're ending up supporting 3 or 4 people. And so, and I think that's actually a huge issue when it comes to building wealth, because that person could be building a lot more wealth if they didn't have to be taking care of 2 or 3 other people in their family, right? So those are the kinds of things that in addition to our relationship, our own relationship with money, is that relationship with money in the context of our family. The other point that you made, which I think is really important also, you're talking about raising young men who have certain value systems, but also for young women. I mean, I can't tell you, we still have a culture where women are, especially young women of color, are kind of bred to think like, go marry a rich guy, right? Be cute because you can you can get yourself a man that makes a certain amount of money. I mean, we still hear about it, right? And it's like, well, why are we not teaching them to go get a job so they can have their own money, right? Or being pretty enough to like get the guy that's got money so that you can be supported.
Yeah, like, so we're still be a trophy wife.
Yeah, I mean, we're still doing some of that, you know, and it's like, wow, instead of being like, no, to be sexy, you should be paying your bills. To be sexy, you should have a job. You should have a 401k. You should have your investment accounts. Like that should be part of being grown.
Talking about ETFs is super sexy.
Yes. Talking about how much you've made in your account and being like, I don't need someone to buy me a drink because I got my own money.
Yes.
Right. We're moving to that direction, but you still see some of these old tropes playing out.
Yes, definitely. And, sometimes I'm so inspired by how much, like how far we've come. And then at the same time, I might see some other like bit of information on social media or in the news and I'd be like, oh my God, it's 2021. Come on already. I thought we'd already unpacked this stuff, but obviously we haven't because it's still showing up on the news. So a good friend of mine recently, a white woman, she had to go to a shelter with her kids. Mm-hmm. And her husband's a white guy, right? And she was in a shelter for 3 months. And a lot of that had to do with money. He was in a home that belonged to her and he wouldn't leave. And it was just like, it's
the financial, yes, but I think that's actually really, I'm glad you brought this up because we actually want to launch something around financial behaviors and domestic violence because there are a lot of women in situations where they are in a really negative dynamic with their partners. And sure, it might not be that they're getting physically violated, but they are still in a relationship where there is a power dynamic that has all the things to do with money. This is exactly how financial abuse begins to happen. Women start to ask questions and they don't get answers. Husband controls credit cards. So when he's mad, he will cut them off, right? Owns the cars. So all the cars are titled in his name. That means if you want to leave, you don't even have a car to leave in, right? There's all of these things. And then the house. But I think one of the ways to kind of test these waters, and I always tell women to do this, especially if they're in either a marriage or they're living together, ask him where his accounts are. Ask him where the joint accounts are. Ask them to make sure that your name is on all of those accounts. Right? These are things, and if they don't feel they're not able to work with you on that, then that's a red flag.
Oh yes, definitely. Huge red flag. And you just reminded me of, I was married for over 10 years and we were going to therapy. And one of my biggest complaints was like how we related to money differently. And the therapist suggested, so basically the situation was he had terrible credit. I've always had very good credit because I'm like super responsible when it comes to my credit. And he had the extras of all my credit cards, like every single one. He had like the extra card. And he would go out and buy things and not tell me about it. And so I'd like get these bills and be like, oh, why do we owe so much money? And his response was, well, I'm the one paying for them, so you don't have to worry about it. But he wouldn't pay on time. So I brought this to the therapist and she said, well, have you ever considered canceling his card? And it was like,
right.
It right. Like exploded. And Ramona, I was scared.
Right.
I was trembling when I went and I canceled the cards. And his reaction, was not a good one. He was furious. Like there was nothing he could do about it.
Right, because it was a power play. Right. And it's not when and it's exactly why you didn't feel good doing it, because it was a power play. And now you in that situation, you had to do it understandably, right? He was ruining your credit essentially. Yeah. And by the way, this happens a lot in families too, at least, especially in Latino families. I've seen this where parents will use the credit, their social security of their kids to open up lines of credit. And, what do? It's very hard to do anything about it. But the point is that when it comes to dealing with money too, it is about power. And that's why it's so complex. And in that situation, he was using you in ways that were not okay. And then you kind of had to do a power play on it and be like, all right, I'm cutting this off. Now, but imagine, again, you had a consciousness about it where you were like, ooh, I don't like this feeling. I don't want to do this. I kind of have, you're pushing me to do it. But men do this all the time with women without the consciousness about like that it's a power play, and they're just going to do it. And I think that's where, right, and especially if they've told you, oh, I don't want you to work, right? There's that whole, like, I don't want you to work, and you don't worry about it. I take care of the bills, but then you're relying on them, and then all of a sudden, 10, 15 years into the relationship, and, right, and you've never worked, you don't have any, and like then there's a divorce or there's something that happens, and you have nothing to sit back on.
I think that a big part of learning about emotional intelligence and finance has to do with owning your own power. So Ramona,
Yes.
I know
Yes.
that a big part of what you do with your work and your business has to do with that, with owning your power and people stepping into
That's
that.
right.
So I don't know if you could share a little bit more about what you do with My Money, My Future. You mentioned it's a fintech company, but what can people do with My Money, My Future?
Sure, absolutely. So the genesis was always about how do we get people quality financial advice to understand how to build wealth? Because I think one of the things well, there's two things. One is personal finance is overwhelming and confusing because there's a lot of moving pieces, right? It's not just about having a bank account. It's not just about having even an investment account. It's not just about budgeting. There are all those things together and many more and different products that you use to build wealth over time. And so I think part of what we were trying to really do is take the complexity out of something that is actually pretty complex, right? And how do we simplify it? And then how do we make it culturally relevant so people understand why it's important? And so the why is a part of like the brand, the storytelling, blog, the community we're building. But on the platform itself, it was about how do you guide some people through a financial decision. So much like Google Maps, right? You like, here's where I'm at and here's where I want to go. Give me the directions. Because for most of us, especially if you don't have $1 million in assets, it's very hard to get that kind of financial advice, right? People, you could go see a financial advisor. Well, unless you have enough assets under management, you're not going to get one because the model is such that you really generally have to have a lot of money for them to manage, for them to give you the advice. Most of the financial advice that people are getting, let's say in community organizations, is very simplistic. And again, no fault of their own, but it's pretty simplistic. It's like, here's how to save or here's how to buy a house. Those are the kind of the main things that you get financial education around. And so we wanted to build something where people felt like they had someone to turn to get information on financial products and financial decisions, and then to help guide them to wealth building. And we have kind of essentially 5 pillars to wealth building. One is you have to understand budgeting, right? You just can't spend more than you make. You have to understand savings products. So you have to have an emergency savings and understand the importance of having some of that. You have to have an investment accounts, including retirement and brokerage account. You have to understand credit, learn how to manage credit. Credit is king, right? And like you said, it's super important for everything you're doing in your life. And then you have to have insurance, or you have to understand estate planning, right? So life insurance, insurance on your home. How do you protect the things that you are working so hard to get? And that's what we essentially are trying to build on My Money, My Future. You get an account, it's free. We're going to walk you through financial decisions, and we're also going to help you create a plan. What we're doing right now, we have some updates we're working on that we're really excited about. And some of those updates have to do with actually understanding your financial personality. Because we've realized now over the last 3 or 4 years, talking to hundreds of people, hundreds of users, that so much of how people's with their financial behaviors have to do with their financial personality. Who do they want to be? It's that question of money as a means to an end. What's your end? The end is different for everyone, but there are 4 or 5 prototypes of kind of different people. And that's what we're trying to really hone in on right now. In addition, we do have these very particular classes that we've launched, the boot camps. We love the boot camp method, which is really get in there, do the work, get some skin in the game, understand the rules of the game, particularly for investing, because it is a big part of the strategy for building wealth.
You know, listening to your explanation just now, I thought that there's also an offshoot of that with your money personality. You could, when you're dating, you want to know the money personality of the other person, right? Because one of the biggest causes of divorce is finance.
Oh, absolutely. And we actually have a new partnership with a great company, a good friend of mine started, called the Money Box. And it's actually for couples. So it's something that we're going to money with your partner before people get into these long-term relationships and realize, oh my God, we're totally different when it comes to money. Because if you are, that is going to cause you massive amounts of problems later on.
Yeah, you want to talk about money, kids, you want to talk about
and
all
family
before you hook yourself up to somebody, for sure. Yeah.
My tax law professor told us one time, he's like, marriage is just a financial transaction. And in some ways it's true. I mean, not to be cruel, but it's a financial transaction. When you come together, you are now legally bound by a contract.
Which reminded me of something you said earlier about, girls being taught that they should be pretty and attractive so they can find that rich husband. And I don't know if you've ever heard Cher say this. Her mother said to her, oh, honey, you need to find a rich man and settle down. And she's a rich man to take care of you. And she said, Mom, I am a rich man. Like, that's me. And I'm like, right. I want to be like Cher. I want to be the rich man. Like, that. And I got that messaging as well when I was growing up. I remember I said to one of my mother's friends that I wanted to marry a rich man. And she said to me, oh, no, Alma, you make your own money and marry whoever you want. And I always thought that was like a very counterculture thing to say, but also some of the best advice I've ever gotten in my life. Because in the end, it's my responsibility. Right. I have to be responsible for me. And the idea of like, I'm going to find a Jeff Bezos, for example, to be like the richest man in the world and take care of me. That doesn't.
It's still not your money though. And that's what I tell women all the time. I'm like, even if that is your plan, girl, most rich men have great lawyers. Believe me that they're going to take care of theirs, and that's not your money. You might be taken care of in the context of during the relationship, but not afterwards. Like, that is their money, and believe me, there's going to be a lot of legalese around that to protect that wealth. You're much better off just having your own money.
I just came to mind a good example of that, and someone that I admire from let's say, like, from a business perspective, because I think there's a lot of that can be problematic. But if you look at the history of Kris Jenner, she was married to Rob Kardashian, who was extremely wealthy, right? He was a very high-profile lawyer.
Yes.
And when they went through the divorce, she had a completely different lifestyle that was not what she had become accustomed to, because she didn't have any money. And so she had to go and build her own wealth, which I think that was, we would have to ask Kris Jenner, but that was, where the whole momager and business savviness came from.
Right.
I don't like this. I don't like not having this lifestyle. I want to get it back. And that, in her case, that was a motivator for her to build her wealth. But in the end, if we can just be really radically responsible for ourselves, I think that will take a lot of the pain and suffering away from putting money into relationships.
Right. And then it also support your own growth as a woman, as, saying, what do I want? And do, and then you use that money to support what you want to do. The money is, again, that's there to support your fulfillment, right? And so again, do you want to live on the beach and have a hut and a little small business? Cool. What do you need to get there? What can you need to do now to plan for that? Because that's the other thing, that financial, wealth building requires a plan. And I think that even for all of us, when we think about our own relationships and growing up and being mature and getting things we want, all of that requires some kind of a plan. And I think that we just need to think about it as, it's not a separate plan. It is part of the plan. It's part of your life plan, right? That's what I'm saying, is that it shouldn't be a separate thing. It's like, oh yeah, that's that money thing. No. Money is a key element of all of the other things. I'm not saying money buys happiness, but it supports.
Broken down and you don't have a way to get to work.
It absolutely supports, and it's almost like, well, I've talked about this a lot, actually, when you look at, it's just slipped my mind. There's a scale of the needs. I think it's a sociological scale. Basically, if your basic needs are not met, you are unable to really think.
Yeah, you're talking about Maslow's hierarchy.
Oh, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So when people are just in survival mode, they're not innovating new companies. They're not, dreaming big and writing books and in their head. They have no time for that. And so when we're able to get people to a place of not just survival, and we talk a lot about this a lot, don't just survive, but thrive. I want to get people in that thriving space. That does require that at least your basic needs are met, right? And that requires money. I mean, it just does.
Ramona, I could talk to you like the rest of the day about this, because I have found somebody who likes to talk about money as much as I do. And I'm probably more, because you've built your career around this. There's so much more that I'd love to talk about, but I want to be respectful of your time. And also I try to keep these episodes to keep them short, at least to under an hour.
Sure.
So we've been talking for pretty much over an hour, and I just want to thank you for coming on and just doing
Absolutely.
the work that you do, because like you, Ramona, little girl Ramona, what did you say? You were like 7 or 8 years old to your grandmother's place of employment, and
right,
you became inspired because you saw it. You were able to imagine yourself in this place of wealth, and so you are being that role model. You saw it, so you were able to do it, and now you are that representation of, representation matters. In order to be it, you have to be able to see it. So now, our kids are able to see a successful Latina woman of color, college educated, within her own fintech company, doing all these amazing things with her career that will allow for our next generations to be like, okay, now I'm going to take it that one step or 10 steps or how many steps further. And we need more representation. We need more women of color in leadership positions across the board. And so I just want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you continuing the conversations, right? This is about a movement. It's going to require all of us to do different parts. And the fact is that the different kinds of podcasts or social media that's out there, that's promoting these conversations, it's normalizing this. We are in a really important moment in time where I think it's changing. We're moving the needle. And I mean, it's a slow needle, but we're moving it. And so thank you. And thanks for inviting me on, and happy to return to talk about more things in money. And especially when the book comes out. because the book
Oh, that's
is,
right. You're working on a book,
uh,
right?
I am, and we hope that's the idea is that I really want to write the book that like I wish all of us could give to our younger selves, right? If you think about like sort of the Rich Dad Poor Dad book that people seem to like, it's kind of everybody knows, it's like, oh, use this, it's a Bible to. I want that to be our. I want to write that Bible, that money Bible for women of color, right? Which is, here's how we're going to approach this. It's a little bit different, but I think that's sort of, the goal with the book, and I'm excited to be working on that right now.
Is there like an expected release date, or where are you on that?
It's probably 2020, early 2022. We just actually like got our agency and all that. So, I mean, but I plan to be writing it fairly quickly, but it's still with just a matter of like, it's going to be at least another 6 months to write, and you got another 3 months of edits and production and all that stuff. So probably early 2022.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And as soon as you have a waiting list, I want to sign up.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll talk about money and love again very soon.
Thank you so much, Ramona. This is awesome.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. The conversation between myself and Ramona Ortega around love, finance, emotions, money. What did you think? Who would you like to see me talk to around emotions and finance? What are your thoughts on the power dynamics in relationships? Do you see this only in heteronormative relationships, or do you think this is something that also plays out in same-sex couples? I'm really interested in having a dialogue around emotions and finance. I think it's one of the most relevant topics to date, especially when we talk about changing the traditional roles around how communities and families are built. Money is just such an important tool in our world and also a very relevant topic. I look forward to hearing from you, and please like, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you in the next episode of Let's Talk Money with me, Alma Maria Renaz. Bye.